right, let's jump right into this explainer and unpack a truly wild paradox unfolding right in front of us. We are looking at the aftermath of the 2026 US-Iran conflict, specifically Operations Epic Fury and Roaring Lion. Now, on paper, Iran's conventional military has sustained absolutely catastrophic losses. We're talking major warships sunk, air defenses severely degraded, and conventional bases systematically targeted. And yet, somehow, this highly degraded force is still managing to panic the global economy, trap tens of thousands of sailors, and create a massive headache for the world's most powerful militaries. So how is that even possible? Today, we're going to explore exactly how a devastated military can still, effectively, rule the waves.
Here is our roadmap for today. First, we'll cover the 2026 Gulf conflict. Then, the asymmetric naval threat, choking the Strait of Hormuz, drones and the proxy web, and finally, the limits of U.S. power. All right, part 1. The 2026 Gulf conflict, from proxy wars to direct strikes. It's really striking to see how fast things escalated over just a few years. What started out as regional proxy skirmishes back in late 2023 dramatically shifted in December 2024. That was when the Assad regime fell in Syria. That single event completely severed the critical land bridge connecting Iran to its Mediterranean proxies. Feeling totally cornered, escalations intensified, which led to that intense 12-day war in June 2025. And of course, that all culminated in the overwhelming kinetic strikes of Operations Epic Fury and Roaring Lion in February 2026, where Iranian military infrastructure was just systematically hammered. But here is where the story gets really fascinating. While their conventional forces took a beating, their underlying resilience is kind of shocking. Think about this. Prior to 2025, Iran held roughly 3,000 ballistic missiles. Those June 2025 strikes, they wiped out about half of that stockpile and destroyed 2/3 of their known launchers. But by February 2026, thanks to a massive domestic industrial base, they were rapidly churning out several hundred weapons a month. They actually recovered a stockpile of 2,000 heavy ballistic missiles right before the major February strikes hit.
So, the main takeaway here is that Iran isn't actually rebuilding a traditional army. Well, scratch that. They aren't bothering to rebuild a traditional army because they know they can't match US or Israeli air superiority head-on. Instead, they've adopted this doctrine called differential reconstruction. They are putting all their chips into asymmetric tools. We're talking replenishing missiles, recovering air defenses, and seriously accelerating the deep underground fortification of their nuclear facilities, like those massive excavations at Pickaxe Mountain. Basically, they're adapting by moving the most dangerous stuff completely out of reach.
Moving on to part 2, the asymmetric naval threat. David versus Goliath at sea.
You can see a massive, highly effective strategic shift when you compare the heavily degraded Artesh, which is Iran's conventional navy, with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps' navy, or the IRGC-N. The Artesh relied on large blue water surface combatants, and frankly, those were easy targets for US strikes. The IRGC-N operates totally differently. They basically traded a vulnerable sledgehammer for a swarm of deadly mosquitoes. They don't rely on big ships. They rely on asymmetric, highly autonomous, and easily concealable forces.
And here is exactly how they pull that off on the water. The IRGC relies on extremely cheap, decentralized tactics. We are talking about fast attack missile boats like the C-14 and Tondar class with crews of fewer than a dozen people. Because they're so tiny, they can hide in concealed coastal bays or operate from forward outposts on little islands, like Farsi Island. It's the ultimate asymmetric headache. Imagine multi-billion-dollar blue water vessels forced to play whack-a-mole with everyday fishing dhows that are secretly laying naval mines. It creates a persistent, highly stressful maritime threat in those shallow, constrained waters of the Persian Gulf. And all of this builds perfectly into their broader concept of mosaic defense. It's basically a decentralized command and control structure. The central command nodes might be completely wiped out by American airstrikes, sure, but because local commanders are granted immense operational autonomy, those tiny boats can independently just keep up the harassment. You literally can't just cut off the head of the snake because the body has been specifically designed to keep fighting on its own. Let's move to Section 3. Choking the Strait of Hormuz, the global economic bottleneck. Get this, a staggering 20% of the world's traded oil passes through the Strait of Hormuz. That one narrow waterway directly dictates the price you pay at the gas pump. When Iran conducted a live-fire exercise titled Smart Control of the Strait of Hormuz in February 2026, they temporarily closed parts of it. And that unprecedented move sent absolute shockwaves through global energy markets. It proved that Iran doesn't need to actually sink an American aircraft carrier to win. They just need to introduce enough risk to freeze international shipping. And the human and economic toll of that risk? It's massive. 20,000. That is the number of seafarers recently reported stranded in the Gulf right now. They are trapped not necessarily by a wall of military ships, but by skyrocketing war risk insurance premiums and intermittent drone and missile attacks that have already, tragically, claimed civilian lives. The global supply chain relies on these waters, and right now, it is effectively held hostage to uncertainty.
So this dynamic creates a massive paradox and a total standoff. As noted by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, the United States is essentially blockading the blockaders. The U.S. military is trying to counter Iran's disruption of global shipping by blocking traffic to and from Iranian ports. It's basically a high-stakes staring contest where both sides are inflicting severe economic pain, just waiting to see whose political endurance breaks first.
All right, part 4, drones and the proxy web, externalizing the conflict. While the axis of resistance is at its weakest in a decade, it's far from dead. Take a look at these groups. Hezbollah, who once boasted 100,000 rockets, is now severely degraded. The Syrian proxies are effectively dissolved. But look at the Houthis in Yemen. They remain highly operational and geographically protected, and they're continuing to disrupt the Red Sea. And the Iraqi militias? They still retain moderate influence because they are embedded directly into state institutions. To keep these remaining proxies armed, Iran leans heavily on its drone technology. The Shahed 136 one-way attack drone has become a literal global menace. Why? Because they are incredibly cheap, we're talking roughly $200,000 each, and mass-produced. It creates this bizarre low-cost advantage that forces adversaries to fire million-dollar defense missiles just to shoot down a $200,000 drone. The math just doesn't work out. In fact, these systems are so effective at swarming defenses that the US military actually reverse-engineered them to create their own Lucas clone squadron by late 2025. The crucial point here is how Iran adapted its proxy strategy. When the fall of Assad severed their physical land bridge in 2024, they didn't just give up. They shifted their supply chains to maritime routes through Yemen and covert networks in Iraq. More importantly, they adopted a tactic called simultaneity. Instead of perfectly coordinated military campaigns, these remaining proxy groups just launch uncoordinated, chaotic harassment across multiple fronts at the exact same time. It's specifically designed to overwhelm and exhaust defense systems.
Which brings us to Section 5, the limits of U.S. power, navigating an asymmetric stalemate.
You might be wondering, why can't the most powerful military in the world just put an end to this? Well, first, we have to look at the massive strategic divergence between the U.S. and its key ally, Israel. Washington fundamentally seeks to stabilize maritime routes, keep global energy flowing, and avoid domestic political fallout from a prolonged Middle East war. Israel, on the other hand, views Iran's proxies and its recovering nuclear program as a direct existential threat that requires total dismantlement. So an agreement that satisfies Washington by opening the shipping lanes might completely fail to address Israel's security requirements.
Furthermore, US leaders are caught in a brutal credibility trap. If they want to fully secure the Gulf, they need to actually clear the naval mines and suppress those small coastal bases. But doing so risks American ground troop casualties, which is political poison back home. Add in great power competition. China actively undermines US economic pressure by purchasing Iranian oil and providing satellite imagery, and Washington finds its options severely constrained. And this brings us back to our overarching paradox. Destroying Iran's conventional military didn't restore global economic stability. Eliminating tanks and large warships doesn't stop cheap drones, hidden speedboats, and independent proxy militias. So it forces us to ask the big question: can overwhelming traditional firepower ever truly solve an asymmetric standoff? Or does it merely force an adversary to rely on highly disruptive, unconventional tactics?
I will leave you with this final thought. The current situation is no longer a clash of military capabilities. It is a brutal struggle of political endurance. Unless a new diplomatic framework is reached, this low-level, high-cost disruption of global trade and your daily life might not be a temporary crisis. It might just be the durable, incredibly expensive new normal. So what do you think is the path out of this stalemate? Thanks for joining me on this explainer today. Keep learning, and I'll see you next time.